Good morning. Today is Friday, February 18th, 2000, and it's my pleasure to be with Thomas Sullivan, Dean of the University of Minnesota College of Law and former Dean of the University of Arizona College of Law from 1989 to 1994. My name is Vicki Fleischer, and I'm here to ask Dean Sullivan a few questions. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure to be here.
Dean Sullivan, can you tell us why you wanted to become the Dean of the University of Arizona College of Law?
Well, in 1988 and 1989, I was asked by a number of universities whether I would pursue or consider a deanship, and the University of Arizona was one of them. And I was fortunate to have a number of opportunities to be a dean. I was at Washington University in St. Louis at the time. And it was clear to me that the University of Arizona had the greatest potential to really make significant progress among the other schools that I was speaking with, and I was immediately taken by the warmth of the faculty and the students here. And my wife and I, having some choices to make, decided that this is clearly the place that we wanted to be.
Well, we're very lucky that you made that decision. Can you tell me what the school was like when you arrived in terms of its assets?
Well, my predecessor, Paul Marcus, had done a remarkable job of reinvigorating the energy and enthusiasm of the alumni, as well as bringing in a number of very fine new young faculty. I think the school was in very good shape because of Paul's stewardship when I arrived. It was, however, on difficult financial grounds. And so we had to try to prepare the law school for the last decade of the 20th century. But in terms of the richness of the people that were here, the talents of the students, a remarkably dedicated teaching faculty, and a very inspired group of alumni, it was really a very good place to arrive and to try to help in the 1990s moving forward.
Great. What types of problems were there here when you arrived?
As there are with most universities, but particularly with public universities, there were significantly difficult problems regarding underfunding. The University of Arizona, as you know, is a major research university, and its law school had a national reputation. But the funding was severely lacking from the state level. There was also at that time, the state government in Phoenix was very fiscally conservative. And the 6 years that I served as dean here, there were very significant statewide and university-wide budget cuts which affected the law school. So we had to struggle to keep ahead of that curve in terms of not letting the severe cutbacks from the state government affect our programmatic initiatives. So I would say that they were almost exclusively financial.
What was your vision for the law school when you arrived?
I wanted to build on the success and efforts of my predecessors in trying to make the law school much more nationally visible because as Dean Massaro said this morning, this is a terrific institution, and sometimes we forget that the wonderful things that are going on here are not as well articulated on a national perspective. And so one had to try to take the great story that was happening at Arizona and to spread the word around the country to make sure that people realize that this is as good as, in fact, it is a law school. I wanted to try to integrate much more multidiscipline or interdiscipline in our teaching and in our research. My predecessor had begun a joint affiliated faculty program, nationally renowned scholars in other departments on campus that were teaching and writing in areas directly connected with law, and I wanted to build on that. We were able to add three remarkable scholars to the law faculty who were tenured in other departments, including the Vice President for Undergraduate Education, Mike Gottfredson. And we began to really focus our new scholarship and teaching efforts, and I think resources in environmental issues, in international issues, in international economic and trade issues. While I was here, we began the LLM in international trade. We began the National Law Center for International Trade. We built up the library substantially in environmental, comparative, and international law and Indian studies materials. So we were trying to push the interdisciplinary nature because I saw that's where law was going, and particularly I thought Arizona had then, and it continues of course to be the case today, that one ought to connect with this rich regional interest and culture here in the Southwest.
Sounds like you laid the groundwork for what Dean Massaro is trying to do now. Yeah, great. Can you tell me what some of your priorities were when you came to the law school?
Well, they were in fact trying to expand our teaching and research in international and environmental, and particularly within international, the international trade and economic side. We also substantially were building up our American Indian Studies program. We started here at the law school while I was here, the Tribal Law Clinic. We started joint degree programs with the American Indian Studies program on campus, a JD and MA in Indian Studies. We started the Immigration Law Clinic while I was here, and the Battered Women's Shelter Clinic. So we were trying to integrate the theory and the doctrine and the skills with clinical opportunities for students in the context of where we thought Arizona's richness was in the southwestern issues, environment, international, comparative, and Indian studies.
Great. What were some of the high points for you during your tenure as Dean at Arizona?
We were fortunate to hire 9 faculty while I was here, a remarkable group of people. We were able to retain the faculty that were here at that time. We launched a very aggressive fundraising capital campaign effort. We saw the annual fund campaign go from some $240,000 annually to just under $1 million a year. We saw the endowments at the law school almost triple during that period of time, while at the same time we were suffering severe budget cuts from the state and from the university. The budget grew from $3 million to over $7 million while I was here, but that was largely done through the generosity of alumni and through increases in tuition to offset the severe state budget cuts that we suffered. So on the one hand, we were able to enrich the faculty substantially. We also were able to financially look quite strong by reason of the private support and the support of students through tuition increases. And that all inured to the benefit of a stronger program. For example, we were able to endow 25 new scholarships during that period of time, which then helped us bring in these remarkably talented students. I would point to that, the setting of the agenda, laying the foundation and launching the capital campaign, beginning to think about the building expansion, hiring architects to do the planning for that. It was a very busy time, those 6 years.
Sounds like it. Were there any surprises when you were a dean here?
There were always surprises. One of the remarkable things about this job is that no one day is the same. There are challenges every day that you never anticipated when you walked into the office that morning. But I think the history of the deans at Arizona has been to try to turn those challenges into opportunities. At least that's what my predecessors did, and I think Tony is doing that as well.
Were there any special challenges because of the times? You talked a little bit about some of the state budget cuts, but on a national basis, were there any challenges that affected the law school when you were dean?
Yes, certainly the greatest challenge then, and I suspect today, are the disconnects that one finds in a very fine public university when you have state government that is not supporting the research and teaching mission of a great university like this as it should, because of the direct connections between research and excellence in teaching and the new economy and new ideas in this fast, complex world we live in. It does not happen without first-rate education. And for that to have the dramatic effect that it should have in terms of educating the next generation and making investments in the future of the state, it all comes through education. That was the challenge, to try to have our state officials understand that. And I must say that while I was here, I don't think we were very successful in that regard. It was in part because of the leadership in state government that we were not able to persuade toward that, but I think much positive good has happened since that time. I would say, in terms of legal education, what began at that time was not a positive thing, and I think it's actually gotten worse today. And that is this national ranking through popular press. That all began during the time that I was here. Fortunately for Arizona, because of the talents of the faculty and the students, each one of the 6 years our national ranking increased. Clearly the law school was always rated in the top 30 in the United States and the top 10 or 12 public university law schools. That trend started then, it has continued, it has escalated until today, when I think it has become largely a pernicious undertaking and has caused severe dislocations in everything we do in the law school world by reason of these superficial rankings. I think that's very unfortunate.
What do you think you would list as your achievements in moving this law school forward? You've mentioned some. I wonder if there are any others you wanted to add.
I think trying to identify alumni and institutions that could understand our mission and bring them into the support network that was so critical. I firmly believe that each dean really serves as a steward, and we each stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we do the job right, we will try to identify and nurture new relationships and manage those relationships, be they students, faculty, alumni, friends of the law school or university, in ways that over a long course of time will benefit greatly the school. One doesn't always see one's efforts when one is here. But I think one plants those seeds in a way that they will grow later, and ultimately you see the benefits and of course the great successes that can come from those.
Mm-hmm. Well, you definitely did that. During your tenure, what was the connection between the law school and the state bar?
I think it was excellent. Uniquely, the two deans of this state sit on the Board of Governors of the State Bar, which is the governing, official governing board of the bar. And there are monthly meetings and annual meetings. And the deans have always participated very closely with the leadership in the bar as real partners. We're not seen as distant academics, but as friends and supporters in the profession. It was a wonderful relationship, and I quite frankly miss that relationship that I don't have in my current job. The closeness that the deans have serving with the bar and judiciary leaders. Excellent relationship with the bar.
Mm-hmm. Were there any student organizations that came into being while you were the dean here?
Seemingly there was a new one each week, which is great because the student body here is an incredibly talented group of students. They work hard, they're bright, they're thoughtful, and they want to make a difference in people's lives. And they're close, I think, because the student body is relatively small. We had a number of student groups that were new, centering around the new clinics that I mentioned a moment ago, the tribal clinic, the immigration clinic, and the battered women's shelter clinic. And so they fostered new student groups.
Great. You mentioned a bit about your involvement with fundraising, but could you just expand on that a little bit? When you were dean here, how were you involved with fundraising?
Sure. My theory of fundraising is fairly simple, and it's certainly not original. I don't think you can just or should just identify the top 10, 15, 20 prospects and spend all of one's time cultivating and building relationships and then bringing closure to those requests and asks. I think fundraising is a much broader and systematic approach. I think you have to do that, of course. The targeted major donor is crucial, and our successes largely come from those generous people. But I think you have to start with the students in the classroom. I think if you give them a first-rate education in a warm, thoughtful, humane environment, they will be lifelong friends. We began here asking for class gifts to be publicly announced at graduation. Even if those are small contributions, they are important because you have planted the seed while they were students. And if you've done that educational process right, they will contribute throughout their lifetime. I frequently say to students and to young alumni, even if you only start small, we'll put you on the escalator, and over the course of time, we hope that you will reach as far as you can to support the school. And I think it's very important for the dean to spend a lot of time in alumni relationships, building and maintaining those connections back to the school, even if there may be no financial payoff in the early years. So a dean has a continuum or a spectrum that he or she has to work on. From delivering the first-rate education that hopefully will be appreciated through the development of that young alumnus to the time when he or she is in a position to financially give back.
What was your relationship with the rest of the university when you were here?
I think it was very good. I served in a number of roles when the central administration called for assistance. I chaired a number of dean searches on campus. I chaired a number of dean review processes. I served under 2 presidents and 3 provosts while I was here. I think the relationships were very good, and I count as fond memories those relationships, particularly with my fellow dean colleagues. Great group of people here, then and now.
Good. You mentioned that the dean of the University of Arizona and ASU Law School served on the Board of Governors.
Yes.
What additional relationship did you have with the dean of ASU, if any, when you were dean here?
The dean at ASU at that time was Dick Morgan. Dick and I were very close friends then and now. We worked very closely together on all of our common interests. Specifically, Dick and I worked long and carefully on a new tuition structure for students, which I think gave great benefit to the law schools by reason of that restructuring and increasing that will would be felt for many years to come. Dick and I fought efforts to cut back enrollments and to cut back on enrollments in diversity and students of color. There were many other initiatives targeted for the law school by the legislature or by the Board of Regents, all of which I'm pleased to say we were successful in overcoming those hurdles. It took a lot of time on our part, particularly on Dick's part, because he had some local issues in Phoenix that were very difficult challenges for him professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. That brought us together, and we were very close. There was probably never a week in my 6 years that Dick and I were not together or on the phone numerous times working out joint issues that we were trying to resolve.
Mm. You had mentioned that you hired, I believe, 9 faculty members
Yes.
while you were dean. Can you tell us who some of them are?
Yes. Unfortunately, as Dean Massaro said this morning, because of the increased nature of competition in law schools, many of these folks are not with the law school today. Mm-hmm. But the ones that still are Professor Mona Heyman, David Gantz, and Elliot Weiss are faculty members, and the other ones have gone off to very distinguished law schools, and they left after I left, and I know they were losses, but Dean Seligman and Dean Massaro are enriching those openings, and it's the nature of an institution, quite frankly. As our law schools and universities have become so much more competitive, largely through these national rankings that I mentioned. Faculty are less loyal, I think, than they were at one time, and they are much more movable. Mm-hmm. I am also particularly proud of the professional staff that I had the opportunity to hire here. I hired, while I was here, Associate Dean Kay Cavanaugh, Assistant Dean Willie Curtis, the Director, Assistant Dean of Career Services, Mary Birmingham. I hired 2 very talented directors of development while I was here. And quite frankly, my own view is that one of the strengths of a law school is the talent of its professional staff, particularly the permanent professional staff that stays a long time. And those are the folks that make a huge contribution. And I'm pleased that all of them are still here doing the wonderful things that they were doing when I was here.
Mm-hmm. Well, those faculty you mentioned that are still here and those administrators really make a difference every day, that's for sure. Tell me, Dean Sullivan, we're going to hit some big, heavy questions now. What do you believe is the biggest change in legal education, let's say in the last 6 years since you left the University of Arizona?
I think it's the point I made earlier, and it seems to be a simple and perhaps even a superficial point. But I think it goes to really the core of what's happening in this transformative era that we're in. You have 2 things going on. One is the absolute skyrocketing in costs of education in general and specifically legal education. This is due to a number of things. First of all, I think the number one issue that drives cost today is technology, something that in legal education was not heard of 10, 12, 15 years ago. It is an enormous expense. Anybody who manages operations today knows this. In the academy, it drives virtually everything we do, whether it's new teaching pedagogies, whether it's new research, or whether it's the administration of the institution itself. All of it is now completely dependent upon technology, and then we are then at the mercy of those costs. The costs of recruiting and retaining faculty today is enormous, largely by reason of that second point I mentioned, which is the national rankings matter. So the cost of legal education has really gotten very, very substantial. And it is not the appropriate answer to say, well, just hold down your cost or just eliminate. Clinical legal education is the most expensive and in many cases the most important kinds of education we do in law schools. But given the ratio of student teaching faculty, it and technology are so substantial. Legal education today is so very different than it was a decade ago or 25 years ago. No longer can you deliver a first-rate legal education under the old model of putting 150 students in a lecture class with a professor. That's still a part of what we do, but it is a growing smaller part of what we do. And so I think the cost of legal education that has spiraled is clearly the biggest. And second, and equally of a concern, fueling some of that cost is the ubiquitous national rankings that are largely done for commercial purposes and have no real value in terms of enhancing or moving forward the educational enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Going back to when you were dean at the University of Arizona Law College, can you give us an example of something memorable or interesting and perhaps unique that happened when you were here?
Oh, there were so many unique and memorable events. I don't know, Vicki, that there was any one that really stands out. My memory is one of kind of a collage of many remarkable things and many challenges that one hoped that we were able to turn into some opportunities, as I mentioned earlier. We tried to celebrate often the happenings, and I would say that every time you hire a new faculty member, there is wonderful celebration in that regard.
Yeah, certainly.
I would also say in terms of students, because I think they are the centerpiece of the law school. When we started while I was here, the Charles Ayers Scholarships, this was the first full tuition merit-based scholarship at this law school. And that was one of the early endowments that we were successful in accomplishing. And to be able to recruit very talented students. I think one of the highlights of me being here is actually sitting down and interviewing those students for that scholarship. And then, over the course of 3 years, in my case nearly 6 years, to be able to see them come in and watch them progress through the 3 years of their education. And then watch them ripen into fine lawyers in the profession, some of whom are now on our board of visitors. Quite a remarkable story.
Yeah, it certainly is. So let's talk about where some of our graduates went after they graduated. Was it primarily to in-state firms when you were dean? Tell us a little bit about their career placement.
Yes. Then and now, I think the placement is a majority of the students stay in Arizona. During the last 11 or 12 years that I've been associated with this law school, the economy has been quite substantial, and so the students had lots of choice. And the Arizona students have tended very much to stay in the West. Arizona, California, New Mexico, Nevada. That was true then, and that's true now. The majority have gone into private practice, but richly, I think, for the heritage of this school, we have had a larger percentage go into public interest and into government service than is typical of your good public state university law school. And as you know, there's great migration and change and transformation that takes place once one is in the profession.
Absolutely.
This school has a rich history of producing public servants and public leaders. And you can look at the rosters and of the Supreme Court and the federal courts, and really throughout the state government, in some instances in our national government, and you will see University of Arizona law graduates. The history of the school is parallel with the history of producing great leaders for the state and the region and for the country. I'm thinking particularly the great legacy that Congressman Mo Udall left in Washington.
Absolutely. Tell me, Dean Sullivan, in what ways do you think legal education is better now than when you were dean at the University of Arizona?
Oh, I have no doubt about that. I know that's true. Every year, I think the teaching gets better. Every year, the talent that this law school and other law schools bring in is better. The academic credentials, the diversity of the student bodies, the backgrounds of our students, I think is better every single year. I continue to teach, and I see it every year in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it when I was here. I know it continues to be true. I think our scholarship is quite frankly much better today, much more sophisticated today. I don't think there has ever been a better time in American legal history in terms of the shape of our institutions than it is today, quite frankly. And I think that's a tribute to the faculty and particularly the leadership of those faculties.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to make sure that every day, every week, every month, every year we try to do it better. And when you turn around and look retrospectively, maybe in the rearview mirror, it is better.
Yeah, great. So, all that said, are there any areas where you think legal education has fallen behind from the time that you were dean at Arizona?
I think, and I can't speak specifically for Arizona because I've now been gone 5 years, but maybe this pattern of faculty that I mentioned a moment ago is some evidence of this. I think there is less loyalty to one's institution. There might be more self-centeredness among many people in the academy today. Part of this is this fast, rapid, complex dot-com society that we now live in. Part of it is generational, quite frankly. I see this rather remarkably. People who are now recruiting for young faculty as entry-level faculty, I think are quite different. They were brought up in different eras. Economies have been very different in what they've experienced. Our political leadership over the last 20 years has been very different. I think my generation, as I'm sure the generation before me said, these generations that come after us are different. And I think there is just less collegiality, less loyalty to the institution. And I think that's sad. Mm-hmm. And it takes strong decanal leadership to try to change that or to nurture those relationships in a way that can bring that back. And quite frankly, I want to add, Arizona, I think, has more of that camaraderie and collegiality and closeness than almost all of our other law schools. I think that's one of the uniquenesses about this institution. Part of that's a function of size. Part of that's a function of its geographical location. And a large part of that is due to its rich history and traditions that this law school has. Mm-hmm. It's a faculty that's been very stable, largely, over a long course of time, with a remarkably stable professional staff. And so I think Arizona continues to be unique, but I think it's a uniqueness that is not necessarily shared by a lot of law schools in the legal academy today.
Mhm.
And I hope that's something that the institution will continue to maintain.
So if you were to change one thing about legal education, perhaps this follows up with what you were just talking about, what would it be?
Well, I have mentioned the annual rankings, and that's a given if we can set those aside for a more thoughtful evaluation from time to time. I would add that I think there needs to be, from the Academy's perspective, a much more introspective review of our relationships on the national scene with the bar, the profession, and our students. I think sometimes as academics we get far afield on great theories which are important for developing doctrine and how we practice law and how society is shaped through those laws. But I would like to see a much more connectiveness to the legal academy and the bar, and not to see slippage away from our commitment to teach, and I would say importantly to mentor our students. I think there may be less mentoring of students by faculty today than what was the case at an earlier point, and I think that is a shame. This is a profession that we enter, and we invite new students to join with us, and a large part of being successful in our profession is not just the one-on-one teaching, as important as that is, but it is the long-term mentoring relationships that I think we have an obligation to do as teachers, as members of the legal profession. And I think we're losing some of that, quite frankly. Part of that is because of the complex society we live in, the fast pace, the competitiveness that has come to the legal profession. And I understand all that. That is the reality. But I think we all have to spend more time stepping back and reflecting upon the larger professional role than the immediate day-to-day concerns that confront us. We have to save that time. Or we may not be able to save the profession in a way that will make a difference in people's lives, which is the uniqueness about the legal profession.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dean Sullivan, is there anything else you would like to add that I haven't asked you about?
I would just add that from my almost 12-year perspective on this law school, I think it's clear that it's never been in better shape than it is now.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.